This is meant to help guide you through your first time using uNode. However, you're expected to be familiar with Unity and visual scripting in general. The end result, shown here, creating and destroying a collection of cubes, isn't as important as the experience from just following the tutorial. After importing uNode and restarting Unity, we will create the cube that we will be manipulating. And we'll also create uNode class component. Now, uNode gives us access to a variety of things, but we will be starting with the most basic class component for this tutorial. And it gives us access to start and update events by default, and we will be using both of those, so that's fine. All we need to do is give it a name, rotate cube, and then by double clicking on it, we can get access to the editor, where our graphs and nodes that will make everything work exist. Our first goal is to rotate and move the cube. So we will begin by adding a node, which is where all the functionality that we need exists. And we'll be starting with this, which is a reference to this graph, and from that gives us access to the object that the graph and this rotate cube component will be attached to. From here, we can drag out, and then if we find the transform, now this will give us a reference to the transform of the object that we can select by itself with left click, but if we want to go inside it and give us access to work with that transform, we can right click, that you can see indicated by this left and right icon here. And then we can go to rotate, and we will be rotating it by an axis and an angle. Now, you can have your own preference for the visual construction of uNode, and it comes with two different themes, and I will be changing it to the dark gray theme based on my personal preferences, but whatever works best for you works. They both function exactly the same. It's just a different way to lay out all your workings and nodes. And this specifically mostly brings everything inside this component. So the angle we're going to be rotating is 1 and 2, and the speed we will rotate it as 1. And we'll also be moving this, so we can just drag out from this again and find transform, and this time translate, and it will be here. So that gives us access to all of these because we only want to move on the Y by 0.02 and connect the flow to here so that it will start from this entry point of the graph that by default is the starting location, and move through this flow to go through and activate all the nodes. Now this isn't necessary, and at any time we could right click and set something else as the starting point of the graph, but that's there just for the sake of convenience. So if we then, to attach this graph that we're constructing for our object onto the cube, we can just rotate the cube from here to move that onto the cube, and you'll see it will be attached here as a uNode spawner, and it will be referencing that graph. And pressing play, you'll see that it starts rotating and moving as we intended. And that's the first step. Next, we are going to start making this teleport. To do this, we are going to add a new custom function. So if you press the plus here and add new, then double click to rename this teleport. And we want this to happen every 3 seconds. So to be able to do something over an amount of time, this needs to be a coroutine that we run. So to make this a coroutine, we need to change this return type to an IEnumerator. And now we can access this as a coroutine to make this function work. And we are going to be making a repeater so that this will, once this coroutine runs, it will continue to run for infinity and beyond. That will start with the repeater because then it will repeat everything below it, and we'll have the wait for 3 seconds here, and then we will be setting it to a random position. So again, get reference to this, and then this time we want to get reference to its position. And see again, you could left click to get this position or right click to go in, and then just click here to go back. But we do want just this position. And then if we want a variable that we want to, generally anything that is like this, that's a position, if we have a set, then that will be setting this value. So just drag that in there, and then we could put the value in here. That was right clicking and returning its default. But we're going to be making it random. So first we'll drag out from here, and then we'll find vector 3 and get a new vector that gives us access to all the floats. And then we will search for random. Now when you're searching, if what you're looking for doesn't come up at the top, after you've typed what you want, you can press full stop, and then that will make it easier to find exactly what you were looking for. So I'm going to go into this random, and we will be getting a random float between -3 and 3. And by dragging that into each of these, it will give us a random value for this one, then random for that one, then random for that one. And then because this is a coroutine, we want to go out of here and find a yield return at the end of that. And now we're going to be playing this. So in our start, we can just drag this function out here to get a reference to it, and then search for start coroutine. Now, as soon as the game starts, it will run this function, and here it needs reference to where it's going to run the coroutine on, so we can just get this for here, and it will begin this, and which will start repeating this functionality for us. So now if we press play, we can see that it's rotating, and every 3 seconds it's going to teleport to a new location, just like that. And next step, finished. Now after this, we are going to be spawning multiples of this cube with a new uNode component for the spawner. So just create a new uNode component, and we're only going to be using the update for this one, so we can just get rid of that start. And this will be our spawner. And what we also want to be able to do is have a reference to that cube so that we can spawn it. So we'll make this a prefab. We don't need it in our scene anymore. And we will add a variable by pressing the plus symbol there, and it will be a game object. Just double click on here and make a new object, or you can also hold Alt and just left click on it to rename as well. And then we'll just bring our cube in there. And so in this update, we are going to be checking for a left click. So just type input, full stop at the end to easily get access to it. Right click to go into it. And then we want the left mouse button down. So get mouse button down. And that's 0 for the left mouse button. So here we can just drag out, and we're getting an if to check the frame that is down. And then we'll be getting, by dragging just into the scene, we can get that new object, which is our cube, and then instantiate. And so we are going to be instantiating it at a random position. So we'll grab this one here, just drag it in. And for this, we are going to be getting a different random, which will be a random position inside a unit sphere. So that will give you a random position inside a sphere of value 1. So we're going to multiply this to give it a wider range that it can spawn in. Just drag in and multiply by 3 into the position there. Now, if you dragged it in here, because we want to save this object it spawns into a variable. So you don't want to drag it into there and then have another node here saving the object that spawned, because that will run this multiple times. So you want to have something at the very end of this instantiate. So this will be a local variable that you can make from here, and just another game object, and this will be called our spawned object. Drag that in, set, and just drag that there. So when we press left click, it's going to spawn that object. Now, what we want to do is to be able to delete all the objects later after we spawn them with a right click. So to be able to do that, we need to store every single object that we've spawned in. So for this, we're going to use another variable, which will be a list. And so if you see next to this list, there's like a symbol and then 1. That means that after clicking it, we will then be choosing what kind of information that is storing inside there, because it's going to be a list of game objects. It could be a list of balls, it could be a list of colors, it could be a list of ints, but we want a list of game objects. And so this is going to be all objects. Now it's important that after you've created this lists, the value, we need to click on this null to sort of initialize that list that we're wanting to save. So now we can just get and add, and we will be adding the spawned object to the list. Now, after we've added it to the list, we're also going to change the cube's color. So by getting reference to the spawn cube again, we are then going to be getting it a component from it. So to get a component, you'll be dragging out and searching for get component. And now this is another thing where this type, we will be choosing what type it gets. So by left clicking on that, then takes us to the next menu, which is what inside that object are we trying to get? Are we getting a reference to its transform, or reference like what component attached to that are we getting? And we want to get the mesh renderer. So select that. Then from that renderer, we want its material. And then we want to set the color of that material. So the color, the name for that is an underline color. And then just connect the flow to here. And we will be getting another random for this color. So random and color. And we want all of these. We want the one that gives us the values. So put that in there, and max of 1, max of 1. We want this minimum to be 0.5 with a max of 1, so it's a bit brighter. So now we are going to add the detection of the right click, which means we'll be using these two again. So you could Control plus C and Control plus V to paste, but also if you just have them selected, and then if you just press Control D, it will duplicate it straight to where you are. Now, this has kept its connection here, but if you also hold Shift and Alt, then you can just drag with left click and to cut anything in the path to get rid of that. Additionally, where you can also move these nodes around individually if this carry is not highlighted. So if the carry was highlighted, you drag them, but when it's not highlighted, then you just drag them individually. But even when it's not highlighted, if you hold Control, and then when you click on something and start moving it immediately, it drags it all together, connected like that, which is very helpful to move your nodes around the graph. Anyway, we'll connect this after they're finished here. And then we'll be getting the list that we've been adding every game object we created to. And we'll be running through this with a for each. And so you can get a reference of the object it's at in the loop through this output here. So just connect that, and then we will be getting an object to destroy. So just drag that in there. That's what we want to destroy. And then this body is what it will. This body is the output flow that we'll be repeating for each one. So this means that for every single object in this list, it will get the object and destroy it. And to make sure that is on the right click, we have to change this value to 1. But there's also another important part of this. So this list that we are trying to grow and then delete every single object of, Well, this is in a local variable, and because this update runs every frame, the local variable will be reset every frame, and we don't want that. So if we go into this all objects here, we can actually untick this, that reset on enter, which means that this value will be saved over the course of the frames. So it will continue to grow and store all our objects until we want to delete them. And to then add this spawner into our scene, all we need to do is for any uNode component that we're not trying to attach to an object, you can simply just drag it into your scene and it will be added there with the component attached to it. So now if we press play and left click, it will create our objects, and then right clicking will delete them all. And that's our spawner, our cubes, rotating and being destroyed. Now, after this, you can look at your graph and see all of the logic here. But if you want to have a nice bullet point, just concept of what your logic is doing, then if you go into uNode and you open this graph hierarchy, this has a very nice simplified version of everything you're doing. So we can see our input, we're getting the mouse button, then we're spawning the object, saving that to the variable, adding it to the list, setting a color, and then after that, if we are getting the right mouse button, then for each of our objects, we're destroying them. And when you're playing, you can see all of this happen in real time by going into your debug and selecting the spawner itself. And so you can see it flowing through here, but also you can see it flowing through your hierarchy. So we have everything working, but what happens if we wanted to change things during while it's playing? Well, with the uNode components, we can do that by simply playing the scene, and I'll just create a couple of cubes. And now we can just select them by going into the debug and choosing one that we want to focus on. We can see that running, we can see it rotating, and we can make changes live. So let's say I want to make it rotate faster. Okay. If I want to make it rotate really fast, fair enough. But let's say I wanted to change its movement like that, and that's just a bit too much movement. So change it like that and like that, and let's say I'm really happy with that, though I'm not, because it's going off into the middle of nowhere. But let's just say I was happy with that. Well, if I click on save, then that will save all of these changes to the base uNode component after I've stopped playing. So if I press stop here and go back to our rotate cube, we can see that all of these changes have been made. So now when I press play again, every single cube I create will be flying off into the distance. And that's the end of this tutorial. I hope this has helped you get your first steps into uNode. And I'll link to a couple videos below that you can go to that might help you expand your experience with uNode after this.